Yeah, I think in my early career, in the military, I never had a formal mentor or sponsor, but I know I had sponsorship from my bosses that I had along the way. I think I earned that from them just by my relationship with them. But I do look back on that time and think I wish I'd been a little bit more intentional and deliberate about finding people who I could have that conversation with in an effective manner. But now it's made me relook at the situation, and I try to put a lot back into the organization, because I feel like if I had a leader like myself around above me who would pull me aside and said, you know what, you probably should think about having a mentor or a sponsor, or at least a peer that you can talk to and just have a little bit more of a conversation about what you're doing.
Hi, and thank you for giving your time to Unlimited Seating. I'm your host, Sanila Samuel. Every episode, we bring to you a role model who shares her journey in an easy-flowing, candid conversation. We talk about early childhood influences, career choices, and how they've navigated through biases and life in general to get to where they are at today. Through these conversations, Unlimited Seating aims to inspire, educate, and build a community that promotes and celebrates inclusion and diversity in a world where female leaders are still an exception and not the norm. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unlimited Seating, featuring candid conversations with female role models in the workplace. It's my honor to host today on Unlimited Seating Keren Rambow. Keren is VP Sales for Americas at GE Aerospace and has held various other senior leadership roles at the company. In her previous life, she ran her own business, Pacific Aerospace Consulting, based in San Diego, and prior to that, Keren was an officer in the Royal Australian Air Force for 15 years, where she held roles within engineering design, logistics, and the quality organization. Keren, thanks so much for taking the time to share a little bit of your story with us today.
Thanks, Sanila, and thank you for hosting this podcast. I think it's fantastic.
I said a little bit of your story because I went through your whole profile and your experience, and I'm sure we can't cover even a third of it today. But I'm going to try my best to get as much of your experience and wisdom as I can today, okay?
No problem.
Keren, today you lead a multi-billion-dollar sales portfolio, right? But let's go back to where you started out career-wise, going through what you studied, science graduate, BSc in high energy astrophysics, math and physics, and then your engineering in electrical engineering, and then your MBA. What led you down that path? Have you always been a geek?
No, I think it's a good question. I think it speaks to the dreams you have as a child, and you have this straight path in mind, but that never really eventuates. So as a child, I wanted to be an engineer. My father was an engineer, and I ended up joining the military, our military academy in Australia. And originally I was accepted as an engineer, and they, right at the last minute, told me I couldn't, but I could go in as a supply officer and do a science degree. And that's not what I wanted to do, but my parents kind of gently, assertively told me that the right decision was to go to the academy and just understand my options after my first couple of years. So I did that. I went. My options didn't open up. I had to stay as a supply officer and finish my science degree, which, by the way, I ended up absolutely loving, doing a physics maths double major. And then I ended up being able to stay for an extra year and do a year in high energy astrophysics and get my honours degree, which sounds really brainy, but it was actually quite enjoyable. I had a great thesis lecturer and I just enjoyed it. So I did that and came out as a supply officer and was posted to my first posting. And my first boss said to me, "Why aren't you an engineer?" Which I threw my hands up in the air. I went, "That's what I want to be." And he said, "We'll send you back to do engineering part-time," which was just phenomenal. So I actually got to do part-time engineering. It didn't take me very long because I'd already done all the math that I needed for it. So I ended up getting my engineering degree 2 years later, and I had both. So now everyone thinks I've got this big brain because I've got this triple degree, but it was really just the path I wanted to go on, which didn't go as straight as I was actually intending, but the benefits at the end of it were quite large. So it was a very early lesson for me just to take opportunities as they come, see them through. You don't know what's going to be at the end of it. So at a young age, I've got a very good lesson in that.
Triple science graduate, it kind of reflects a bit that you are quite brainy, Keren. Let's just say that. Okay.
I do work hard. I work hard.
Yeah, you actually persisted. So you were working and then you went and did your electrical engineering while you were working as well. You wanted that engineering degree and career.
Yep.
So 15 years within the Air Force, Keren, tell us what that is like. And also, I want to ask you, how many women did you have as your peers? Whenever we say Army, Air Force, we always picture a very small minority of women. If that was the environment you were in, how was the 15 years that you had in the Air Force?
Yeah, it was definitely, I think we had less than 10% women, especially at the academy. Our academy in Australia is Army, Air Force, and Navy together. I think Air Force was probably the most progressive at the time in terms of the number of women and the most open to the flexibility. I really enjoyed my time in the Air Force. I think integration and acceptance of women was at the start of that process. I had very good bosses. I never had a female boss. They're always male, but they were always very accepting. And I think I definitely had an attitude of try not to be different. And here's where I regret my approach in my early career was to try and not stand out as a female, try to be one of the boys, just head down, get your job done. You'll be recognized by what you do. Part of that was the cultural environment. I think it was still early on in terms of don't stick out type of an attitude, but I think it was slowly changing. But I wish I had have been a little bit more progressive in helping that change move a little bit faster. That's something I look back on and something that motivates me today to be a little bit more vocal in terms of diversity and trying to get more people into the environment.
Yeah, and I always think that when you're young and starting out in your career, you're all thinking about yourself, right? And you
Yeah.
want to learn, you want to grow, and you want to do well. And probably I feel that's where having mentors, you said obviously there were not a lot of female leaders, but I feel that's why today having those female leaders as mentors really helps because then you can say, okay, you know what, when I was younger, maybe I didn't do this, so focus on this, building your network.
And I don't feel like we were, as women, the small amount of women we have, I have a very good core group of friends who are in all three services and we're very supportive. But I feel like in the broader environment, none of us were very good at helping each other. Like we didn't really think that together as a group we could be more powerful. And I wish we had done that differently back then. But I think all of us have learned from that and we operate differently now.
So Air Force, you moved out of the, I think you went to the US as part of your time in the Air Force. And you also then decided to set up your own business and you start your own company. How did that come about? What made you make the decision to make that move?
Yeah, I was very happy in the Air Force and I would not have left if I wasn't forced to by personal circumstances. But my second last posting in the military was an exchange posting with the US Marine Corps at Miramar in San Diego, which was a fantastic posting as a mid-20-year-old. And I got to do a lot of fun things. I got to be on aircraft carriers, fly in the back seats of fighter jets. So it was fun as well as do a different job in a different military. But that was also where I met my husband. He was one of the pilots in that squadron. And being in two different countries' militaries is not conducive to a good relationship within a marriage. So one of us had to get out and he wasn't able to. So after my second rotation, after I left San Diego, I got out so I could move back to the US and be with him. And I bumped up against a wall in the military environment where I didn't have a US security clearance. So it was going to be very difficult for me to get a job as an engineer in the US military environment. But fortunately, I had some great bosses back in Australia who suggested that my expertise and skills could still be used by the Australian Air Force, even though I think our recruiting department had not evolved enough to think about remote work, because this was in the early 2000s, remote work or leave without pay or something like that. They are very good about it now, but back then, that's kind of 20 years ago now, we're not thinking flexibly in terms of how do we retain women within our organisation who really do want to come back but have 2, 3, 4 year circumstances, whether it be children or marriages or anything else. I think they were lagging in that forethought. But fortunately, my boss wasn't. So anyway, that kind of led us to start our own consultancy business, and we supported and we still support the Australian Air Force today, as well as the US military. We've grown it from me, and I'll tell a story about that in a minute, just me as the first employee, and we have around 100 staff today, which are spread out through the US and Australia. And we have military staff from both countries, ex-military, and they pretty much all would like to work in either country and are able to go both ways. And we've structured the entity so that we can do that, which is fun. But back to me starting it, it was a lesson to me in my own self-confidence, because I was stunned that we felt we could start a business based on my skill sets.
Yeah.
And I was just forever thinking someone's going to work out that I don't have the expertise or skill sets to be able to substantiate a small business being able to grow. And it was just a lesson to me that actually, yes, that can happen. We can build on your skill sets and bring other people into the company and grow this even further. But it was an interesting mindset as I look back on how I felt the whole time. That I just felt like I shouldn't have been there. There's no way we could start this business based on that. And today it's just a thriving company, mainly thanks to a lot of other people we've brought in. But it's something you think about, that self-doubt and that confidence that you actually need to build things. And I look back on it and feel like giving myself a bit of a slap around the head and just don't worry about it.
That's a really cool story. You were keeping in touch and at least listening to your previous colleagues or your bosses as well, right? And sometimes that's so important that you doubt yourself, but lean on those people who can actually boost your confidence for that particular time.
Yeah, I think that's really important, to surround yourself with people who are honest and true, but can also cheer you on and just keep going. You're not going to lose anything from trying to do this. And Eric's parents were great at that. They just said, look, you guys are only young once. Yes, you've got a small family and you're trying to start a small business at the same time, but you're both highly educated people. You'll land on your feet. You just give it a go. Just give it a go.
And you guys are still married as well.
And we're still married. Yes. 20 years this year. We're still married.
Excellent. So on multiple fronts then. So then, Keren, your business was doing well. Like you said, both of you were building a business, adding on employees. It was a good model to run. What made you think about, hey, let me join the corporate world?
Yeah, that was not actually in my thought process, but I was approached by a GE employee who had been in the military with. He rang me up and suggested that I apply for a sales job in GE Commercial Engines. Back in Australia. We were living in San Diego at the time. And my first reaction was, why would I ever do that? Because the business was going well. By then we had about 20 to 30 staff. I think we had enough diversity in our portfolio that we didn't have as much risk as we had at the start. And the flip side of it, my whole experience base was in military avionics systems. And GE was asking me to come into the commercial engine space. And I'm like, an electrical engineer. I'm not a mechanical or an aeronautical engineer. I don't have a lot of experience in engines, even in the military, let alone the commercial space. But GE encouraged me to do it. And to be honest, initially, I just wanted to understand GE's recruiting process, because I thought I could nab a few good ideas on how to recruit good talent in our own business. But it was interesting, just before my first interview, my husband, he said to me, you know what? And this was literally 1 hour before my first interview, you should take this seriously and think about it as an option going forward, because he was willing to move us back to Australia. And me being Australian, having the kids have that exposure to their culture and being close to my family was important. And then we talked it through, and I feel like I was successful in the military, in the government environment. I feel like I had been fairly successful in the small business environment, which is completely different. And I understand commercial aspects a lot more than I did when I was in the military. But there was this, could I be successful in a global corporate company? That was definitely an unticked box, and something for me from a standpoint. Could I be an executive in one of these large companies? So all of that together, plus the move back to Australia, I thought, okay, maybe I can have a swing at this. I was very unsure about it, because being in the commercial engine space was definitely outside my experience level. So I was my confidence questions came back into it. But I went through the interview process, and I had about 8 interviews, and most of them, I think, were GE convincing me that I'd be good at it, rather than me trying to convince them. It was very interesting. So obviously I got through it and got the job, and then I had a 18-month immersion process in commercial engines, which I'll never forget. But glad I entered as a sales director and really got a chance to understand the business, because GE is a very large global corporate, and understanding how to navigate around it is different, probably similar to the military, but still very different to what I'd done before.
I was actually going to ask, you obviously joined it was a sales role from military and then your own business, where I'm guessing you started to pick up some sales skills. Did that come about naturally? Was it something you worked on?
Yeah, and that was something that came out in the interview process, because I definitely viewed myself, and I've always viewed myself as an engineer. That's what I want to be, right? I'm an engineer. But through the interview process, I realized that for the last 12 years in our own small business,
Yeah.
I had been the salesperson. I had been the one generating the leads and negotiating with the Commonwealth and with other entities to get our contracts. I had been the contract negotiator. I had done everything warranted in a military avionics kind of concept, but I had done everything that a GE sales director does for commercial engines. And the whole interview process made me realize I'd been a salesperson for 12 years, which kind of shocked me.
Got it. Okay. So it was, you learned it over time without even realizing it, basically.
Yeah, without consciously, like I knew I was doing the business development effort, but I just didn't think of myself as a salesperson, because I was actually doing the contracts as much as I was negotiating them, which in itself is an interesting learning process, because when you have to do the contracts you negotiate, you're much more careful about what you negotiate into those contracts. Whereas in GE, that's separate people negotiate as to who executes. So you've got to be careful that you don't create these big contracts that are unexecutable.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably building on that a bit, Keren, you grew within the Air Force, right? So leadership roles within the Air Force, then managing your own company, setting it up and running it, and then growing within GE in different leadership roles. Did you find a lot of difference in the environments? How did that influence your leadership style?
Yeah, that's a good question, because leadership's very close and dear to my heart. Right from when you enter the military in Australia, and most militaries, I would say, especially as an officer, leadership is the number one thing that they're teaching you. And they're to you, and then you're put into it. My first role, I had a team of 5 people, and I was 21 years old, and I had 5 guys, all guys, who are all in their mid 40s to up to retirement age, and they're the ones, and you're the one leading that team. So being able to navigate that, understand how to be an effective leader, how to understand how to put your hand up and go, I'm not the expert in the room here, you all are, but I'm the one leading, and how do we make this kind of an effective group? So learning that through the military, the 15 years I had in the RAF were fantastic for giving me that experience. Applying that then to a small business environment, initially it was just me, but as we grew, I think it really taught me, especially in a services business, really it's about the people. If you don't have good people, you don't have a good service. One, it has to be good people, but also you have to look after good people. They have personal lives, they have things going on all the time, and you have to be cognizant of that. How do you look after them? How do you make them feel valued? And you really become their friends, because you're all in it together and you want to make it work. So I view leadership is actually the core of any business, and you get frustrated when people don't see that. But I had a very important lesson, I think, early on when I was my last job in the military. I had a great commanding officer who's really good. And I tend to be a very focused person. When I'm given a job, I go do it, and we will get to the outcome that's expected. And what he said to me, it's great, you can do this. I can rely on you to get everything done. But just remember that the people who are working for you are not robots. They are people. They need to be brought along. You need to know who they are and what things are happening in their family lives, because I was still single at the time. And that really stuck with me, that if they're not happy and they're not feeling like they're bought into the project that you're doing, it's going to be a lot harder. You may get there in the end, but you may have a lot of collateral damage in the process. So it's a lot easier if you bring the whole team along at the same time.
Good life lessons. To ask you this, moving from your own organization, or you really read how small organizations move fast, things happen quickly, and you're probably the decision maker in most of the cases. Did you have to adapt a lot when you moved into the corporate setting?
Yes. Absolutely, yes. There's more of that leadership. There's more peer stakeholder influence that you have to do. I think actually my first job in GE as a sales director, so this is after 25 years of leading people and having that first job, I had no direct reports when I joined GE. And GE is such a large corporation, and you have to lead by influence. Like, you have to lead your peers, you have to lead your sales team that's helping you get your opportunity through the system. You need to lead your leaders, because you need to bring them along. And it's really influential leadership like that, I think, is much more difficult than having actual direct reports. And it teaches you another lesson. And no matter how many years you've actually been in the industry or doing anything, being put in that position humbles you, firstly, which is never a bad thing. It's always good to be humbled along your career path, and makes you think about, okay, how do I adapt my leadership style so I can still execute what needs to be done?
I like that. You still keep the focus on people, right? Like it's not leading the team, but influencing peers and leaders in the organization.
Yeah, I think that's really important for anyone in any industry, any job, is you're always influencing people in some manner or some form. So even if you feel like you're in a job that you're an individual contributor, you're influencing someone. So you've got to think about, what is the leadership influence I have, and how do I practice it, and how do I make it effective, and how do I connect with someone and get a mentor that can help me talk through what that looks like? Because I think that's important. Just internalizing it yourself gets you half the way, but being able to bounce ideas off someone and go, is this really an effective way to do it? Or am I being effective? And getting that feedback, I think, is important.
Which leads me right into where I wanted to go next with you. You talked a little bit before as well, but do you believe mentors and sponsors have played a big role in your career? And also, maybe can you talk a little bit about how you're paying it forward?
Yeah, I think in my early career, in the military, I never had a formal mentor or sponsor, but I know I had sponsorship from my bosses that I had along the way. I think I earned that from them just by my relationship with them. But I do look back on that time and think, I wish I'd been a little bit more intentional and deliberate about finding people who I could have that conversation with in an effective manner. And then the other thing I didn't do in the military was networking. I never did it. And I look back on it now, I think, wow, I missed a lot of opportunities by not just going out there and meeting industry partners and just understanding what they did and making an effort on that behalf. Now I've been on the other side of the fence, I understand the value in it. In my first 15 years, I think I was naive. I was young, I'm not necessarily willing to put that extra effort in. But now it's made me relook at the situation, and I try to put a lot back into the organization, because I feel like if I had a leader like myself around above me who would pull me aside and said, you know what, you probably should think about having a mentor or a sponsor, or at least a peer that you can talk to and just have a little bit more of a conversation about what you're doing. Yeah. So now I rarely refuse a mentor request, which is probably bad in itself. I should probably be a little bit more thoughtful about my own workload, but I feel like even one conversation with someone can help them think about things that they haven't thought about before. And I can encourage them to find a mentor somewhere else in the organization, even if I don't have the capacity to do it, but you at least can nudge them down the path of thinking differently. And I think that's part of what we should all do in terms of helping each other. It doesn't need to be someone above you. It could be a peer. It could be someone outside the organization that you feel, just someone you feel you trust, who's going to give you honest feedback, because honest feedback is not always feedback you want to hear. That's the other thing. A good mentor is someone who's going to tell you stuff you don't want to hear, but tell it to you in a safe environment and a way that you can internalize it and go, okay, got it. How do I fix it? And I think if you have a relationship like that with someone, I think you're going to progress as a person in a professional environment and as an individual yourself.
Keren, can I ask you a question? And I think this is good for people to hear. You're a senior leader in the organization. And I think very often maybe people are maybe a bit nervous about asking senior leaders for mentorship. So what would you like for somebody who wants to seek mentorship? Would you advise, hey, have a specific problem and come to me? Or would you say that it's okay, we can have a chat? Because I think it's useful for people who are looking for mentorship to know. I know I've been personally confused. Should I just block time with somebody? Should I have a specific thing to talk about? How do you think about it?
I would say it would be a poor leader that had someone that approached them for a request on mentoring, said a downright no. I couldn't imagine them saying no. Yeah. Or sometimes they won't have the capacity and they're not going to be able to give it to you effectively. So if they can't do it themselves personally, what they probably will do is recommend someone else, and they'll kind of to you about, okay, who's the right person for you if they can't actually do it themselves. So I would encourage people to reach out to leaders in the organization, do a 30-minute, I just want to connect, I want to throw some ideas around. And most leaders will have that time, and find out if they're available, if that's the person you want to do, or just get their advice on who is the best person for me to have that relationship with and that you think will help me in my current position and where I want to go in the organization.
Thanks. I think that's helpful. I want to ask you something a bit difficult, but I think that will be a good less story for all of us to hear. I think we all have those career downtimes, right? We're a bit lost, something bad happens, you don't get a job or something on the other. Can you share an instance from your life where you've had that down moment, and how did you talk to yourself?
I think I touched on it a little bit before when I left the military. I love being in the Air Force. The Australian Air Force is a great place to work and you have a lot of opportunities. And I had my career path set out in front of me. So when I moved back here to the US, I was very lost in terms of what I was going to do as a career path in the US. And I felt the Air Force at the end, their inflexibility to help me work out a situation where I could come back in 2 to 4 years was really frustrating to me. And I'm glad they've fixed it. But I was lost in terms of what does my career look like? And as I said before, my confidence level on there's no way we're going to be able to build a good, solid small business on my skill sets. This is not sustainable. So I was really lost for a little bit of time because not only was it the engineering side, I had no idea how to run a small. And I've got to credit my husband for this. Just he has more of a just can do, solve each problem as it comes to in front of you and then just move on, which that taught me to do that, right? Small business is not rocket science. It's a lot of admin and you learn a lot about HR, you learn a lot about payroll, the legal stuff, which is actually really good for someone in any job in any organization. So I think that was a learning moment for me in both to have confidence in myself and pivot. Your career won't go the way that you always think it's going to go, but these opportunities that open up in front of you can be amazing. Like people now look at my career profile and go, oh my goodness. And I'm just like, I just did what I had to do as the obstacle came up in front of me. And I think I think the key is your mindset in terms of, okay, the door's just open here. Just run through it and do the best you can at it. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you don't. Most times you actually don't. You'll make it work. You may have little failures along the way, but you'll make it work. And the end result is something that you could never have imagined for yourself.
I think that's very powerful. It's all in the mind, right? It's all in the mindset. And it's funny how we can talk ourselves out of so many things. I'm glad you listened.
It's interesting. I look at my peers. I've got some great friends in the military and they're doing fantastic. I'm so proud of what they've done and where they're at, especially the women. And then I look at my career path and I'm like, actually really enjoy the variation of what I've done and the breadth of skill sets I've managed to accumulate over the years, which I wouldn't have got if I'd stayed in the military. So it's really a gift in disguise.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you something that you've probably been asked many times before, but I always wish that somebody had helped me with this at the start, right? You're a mom of two and growing in your career, however much we say that it's becoming much easier, it's always difficult, especially I feel that's in some years more than the other. What are some that you have had that you can share that, or you wish somebody had shared with you at the start?
Yeah, I think especially as women, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves in terms of the engagement we have with our kids and we have to be there. And if we're not there, we're bashing ourselves up about it. So I think one thing is just be gentle on yourself. And hopefully most women have great family environments. Like I'm very lucky. Eric is definitely a co-parent and he's a co-household person. So he helps around the house. We definitely divide everything. He's a much better cook than I am. So the kids love having him cooking, not me. But I think having that support in the household is definitely a good way to spread the workload and the stress. But I also understand not everybody has that either, right? So there's a lot of single mums out there, or maybe not in a where the husband can actually help as much as what Eric does with me. So I think what I've also learned over the years is don't be afraid to accept help from family and friends. It's actually good for the kids. It's good for them to have that wider community base to be able to get to know other people. It helps them with their resilience. I'm not always there, so they have to have other coping mechanisms. And I look at my kids now who are 17 and 15, and I'm just so proud of where they're at. They have a worldview. They feel like they can live anywhere in the world, which is fantastic. And they're fiercely independent. So I think that helps them grow as kids. And they see what you and your husband do as well. And they're going to emulate that once they get to that spot. So my daughter, I think she has a career path. She's thinking about it. And She knows where she wants to go. I have the conversations about, okay, the path's not going to be straight, but she thinks it is. But I think as a parent, it's just knowing that the environment you're creating is okay. As long as you love them, they're just going to see a different way of living, and that's okay. It's okay if you're on the road. Like, I'm on the road a lot now, and the kids love it. They think it's awesome. Sometimes I brought my daughter to one of our women in aviation conferences, and she absolutely loved it. She loved meeting all the GE women there, and it was just good for her to see women helping women. So I think just overall, I think it's a good experience for kids to see the mums being able to thrive in an environment. And it's a great example for both daughters and sons. I think it's good for my son to see and have that expectation that his future partner is going to work, and that he can be a part of helping in the household. That's a good thing for him, I think, to understand and expect as he grows older.
I love that. I love that about asking for help as well, because I think a lot of the time we grow up thinking I shouldn't ask for help. It shows that I'm weak or I'm not capable of doing things on my own. So I think that's a really good message for people to take away.
Yeah, I was the same as you, Sanila. I'm like, oh, I don't want to ask people. I feel like I'm a burden. But most of the time, as long as you're spreading it out, people are really happy to be able to help out.
I'll probably wrap up with one more question, because I know you have a busy calendar. What do you think needs to happen to bring in more women into the workforce, retain and grow them as senior leaders?
Yeah, I think there's a few key things we can all do to help. One is getting to girls when they're in primary school and high school and kind of teaching them what their options are. Because if they don't see their parents doing it, because not all parents have the same situation as we do, sometimes they don't understand what's available to them and that, yes, you can do it. So I think that's a key part, us going out to the schools and offering our help and being visible and them seeing what options available is key. I think the other key thing is just women helping women in the work environment and just creating that culture where it's supportive, similar to the International Aviation Women's Conference that you and I went to recently. And I think that's what I loved about my daughter seeing, is just this culture of we're all here to help each other. How do we do that effectively? And I think that encourages women to feel safe around other women in that, whichever industry it is, not just aviation. And they want to be there. And then they feel like they're safe to ask questions like, you know what, I want to take 2 years off to look after my child, and then I want to come back. How do I do that effectively? And you help that person do that. And I think as more women get up into senior leadership positions in any organisation, some of those policies can help be changed, not just for women, for men as well, who may want the same thing. They may want to take 2 years off to be with their kids, their wife be the working person. I think if we can really create that culture where we're trying to help each other, identify what the issues are, create policies that help the employees but are also business savvy, because you do have to remember the business has to make money, and taking 2 years off can be a burden. So how do you think like that, where I'm going to create policies that are going to be win-win for both the employee and the business?
Yeah. I like the bit about creating the culture where we all help each other. I think it's slowly changing, but I do feel that sometimes women don't really support each other as much as we really should be. And I enjoy just going to that conference and feeling that environment and just feeling supported.
It changes your mindset. I know you felt it as much as I did, which is why I love going to them, is it just makes you want to be there. So I think if you can recreate that culture in your own business, wherever business you work, you're going to create somewhere where people want to be, not just women, but men as well. And that's a key to employee retention, because it's hard to get good staff in. So you want to keep the employees you have.
Very true. Keren, I know we can go on, and like I said, your career is so diverse and you've got such great experiences. We can go on forever, but I know I need to let you go because you have a region to run. I just want to say I enjoyed our conversation. I've always heard great things about you, but I'm really glad that we got this opportunity where we could learn more about your career and your experience. And thank you so much for sharing your experience and your story with us.
You're welcome, Sanila.
Thank you for staying with us for another episode of Unlimited Seating. Unlimited Seating is available on all major podcast directories, and you can also watch us on our YouTube channel. Please do share your feedback. Alternatively, you can subscribe to us at www.unlimitedseating.com and get notified when new episodes are published.